I am an ex officio member of this task force. I don't have a vote, but certainly I have enjoyed the conversation. And I'll just mention to all of you as task force members, we're here to listen and learn. So your participation, the participation of the presenters is very, very helpful because the goal is to learn as much as we can and make recommendations to the legislature for the 2023 session. So by your involvement in that, you're helping this task force be able to better do their job. Obviously, it's a lot of complex issues as part of this. I just want to especially thank the participation of our task force and giving up your time as we work towards this. And also want to give a big thanks to Parker Slayball, my chief deputy, and the great work that he's doing in leading this task force. I know it's been a lot of work, so thank you. Look forward to a great discussion.
Thank you. Oh, y'all cranked me up. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. This will be our second meeting of the Hemp Task Force. To recap from our first meeting, we heard presentations from three presenters. The first was from the Department of Forensic Science. The second was from a member of the task force, Ryan Davis, about the current enforcement underway from VDAX. And finally, a report from Erin Williams regarding what other states are doing in this space. She's going to be given a part 2 to that report here later this afternoon. During that meeting, we also heard more than 90 minutes of public comment from members of the public. Again, as Secretary Laura said, that was very helpful, very much appreciative. I want to remind everyone why we are convened, though. We are gathered as a group to continue meeting the requirements of House Bill 30. As many of you know, House Bill 30 is the budget that was passed by the General Assembly, signed by Governor Youngkin. And the language that directs this task force to convene reads, quote, to analyze and make recommendations regarding whether any statutory or regulatory modifications are necessary to ensure the safe and responsible manufacture and sale of industrial hemp extracts and other substances containing THC that are intended for human consumption orally or by inhalation in the Commonwealth. The task force shall focus on the current and recommended statutory and regulatory framework for the various isonomer salts and salts of isonomers of THC. As a reminder to those watching virtually or here in person, this task force has no authority to create or write new laws. We're simply tasked by the General Assembly to, quote, report the findings and recommendations of the task force to the governor and to the chairman of the Senate Committee on Rehabilitation and Social Services and to the House Committee on General Laws. Our deadline for that is November 15th of this year. Lawmakers in the General Assembly will have the final say on what, if any, laws will be changed, updated, or eliminated. As I mentioned at the beginning, we did have a lengthy public comment period at our last meeting. While we will not be receiving public comment at this meeting, I have decided to extend the period where we will accept written comment. The original 30-day window for written comment closed last week, but I have asked the House IT staff to make sure we keep that open for an additional week. So that'll close this Friday at 5 p.m. So that will put us well past the 30 days that were originally discussed. I do want to commend, as Secretary Laura said, the members of this task force for their participation. I want to thank those of you who have kind of done your own independent research since we last convened. I know Erin Williams with VDAX held numerous listening sessions with stakeholders and will be reporting on some of those comments and findings later today. Just to give a brief overview of what to expect today, we have 3 presentations. First will be from Christopher Halsedge, the director of the Blue Ridge Poison Control Center. He'll present on recent emergency calls related to cannabinoid consumption. Many in the industry asked to be included on meetings like this and kind of have a voice, so I've asked Jonathan Miller, who's the general counsel for the U.S. Hemp Roundtable, to give a presentation, and then finally, Erin Williams with the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services will give a part 2, so to speak, comparing other state regulations of hemp-derived cannabinoids. After that, we will hopefully have a lengthy task force discussion. We did change rooms from where we were last time. I think this room is a little more conducive to being able to see each other and have conversation amongst task force members. I did send around questions prior to the meeting, asking all the agencies to kind of come prepared to discuss some of those questions, so we'll kind of walk through those. But before we do get started, I want to note those members who are present, myself, Parker Slayball, Maggie Clary should be coming. She indicated just a little bit ago that she should be on her way. Aaron Williams, Ryan Davis with the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, Josh Humphreys, Rich Schweiker with the Office of the Attorney General, Jeremy Priest, Cannabis Control Authority, Caroline Wrong with the Board of Pharmacy, Kristen Clay with the Virginia Department of Health, First Sergeant Dan Wilson and First Sergeant Julia Gunderson with Virginia State Police down here to my right, Shane Wyatt with Division of Consolidated Laboratory Services down at the end down there. Participating virtually, we also have Linda Jackson, who is virtually participating with the Department of Forensic Sciences, and I do want to note that Elliot Casey is not able to make it today. He is with Commonwealth Attorney Services, and then James Williams, we do want to send our best to him. Him and his wife are expecting a baby literally any second, so he could not participate today for good reason. Okay, so let's first get started with our first presentation of the meeting that is going to be from Christopher Holsedge. Christopher is with University of Virginia. He's a professor of emergency medicine and pediatrics within the School of Medicine. He is also chief of the Division of Medical Toxicology and the director of the Blue Ridge Poison Control Center. He is going to be presenting on recent emergency calls related to cannabinoid consumption. Mr. Holsedge, I'll turn it over to you. And he is virtual.
Oh, thank you. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Terrific. No, I want to give you a brief overview, and by doing this, I want to start with, if you can see the slides okay here, two cases and then some data that we've had. Realize that the poison center data that we follow gives us trends. It doesn't give us prevalence of, what we may really have out there. I have nothing to disclose. First of all, I have no financial interests in any of what I'm talking about. First case, 8-year-old, previous repair of a right coronary, right ventricular fistula, and his younger brother found a package of candy. The patient reportedly ate 5 pieces, and his brother ate 1 piece at 2:30 p.m. At 3:30 p.m., both the patient and his younger brother began to appear sedate or their mother. The mother then reported the child collapsed on the floor, stating that he had a dusky blue appearance around his mouth and eyes. She immediately started performing CPR, including mouth-to-mouth, as she wasn't sure if she felt a pulse. After 1 minute, he became responsive but was somnolent, and EMS was called. In the emergency department here at the University of Virginia, the patient and his brother were both markedly somnolent. They had rapid heart rates, and they had what's known as inducible clonus. You push on their ankles, and they tend to flap back and forth, meaning that they're neurostimulated. Both he and his brother were admitted with cardiac monitoring overnight, and their symptoms gradually resolved until the next day when they were finally discharged. The product that they got into was this product, Airhead Extremes Bites. If you look on this product, very similar to what you see with Airheads. On the front, it's stated 408 milligrams of THC per pack or 68 milligrams of THC per piece. On the back side, again, stated that, talked about the weight and what the batch numbers and such were. Also, there was a warning on it, a governmental warning that I'll let you see here for a moment, certainly about children not having access to this, which is interesting from my perspective, my role in the Department of Pediatrics. When you have packaging like this, very difficult to keep kids out of these type of products. He was seen 6 days later in the emergency department with continual abdominal pain, nausea, and anorexia. He was then seen 10 days later after that first incident in the emergency department with intermittent episodes where he felt like everything around him was fake, his stomach drops, and his hands and feet start to shake. He's one of the few cases that we've had that had some persistent symptoms that were hard to attribute exactly why that developed and why he continued to have problems 10 days out after getting into this product. Realized we did do analytics for people like Linda Jackson who are on and such. We did find by his urine drug screen was positive for THC, and he actually did have Delta 9 THC that was in this product, not Delta 8 THC in this one. Case 2, our poison center was called at 3:26 p.m. with a report of a 5-year-old male who reportedly ingested an entire bag of THC Skittles at approximately 1:30 p.m. The parent of the child reported that the child was, quote, out of it initially after exposure. Went to a rural emergency department where the patient was markedly sedate and tachycardic, meaning a rapid heart rate. He was transferred to the University of Virginia Health's Pediatric Emergency Department where we took care of this child at 8:40 p.m. Due to the need for advanced care from their perspective, potential airway compromise. He was subsequently admitted to a monitored bed where, again, after about 24 hours, the child became more normal, was able to be discharged home. The product that child got into was this medicated yellow sour Skittles, Tear and Share. And if you look at the package, it stated 400 average THC per pack, which was not specifying what type of THC per pack. Also, a similar warning on about keeping it out of the hands of children. In this case, both Delta 8 THC, a large spike, and Delta 9 THC were both found within this product. And we've had multiple products that have had either Delta 8, Delta 9, realizing that some of the other Delta products, which I'll talk about briefly, we don't know what that's going to look like on analytics. We're fortunate right now that we can actually do some analytics here to check to see what's in these. THC exposures, we always have gotten certainly THC exposures calls to the poison center and adverse reactions or questions related to them. These are exposures usually with some question because there's some adverse event. If you look, this has been the trend since 2018. Again, we're not looking at prevalence, we're just looking at trends. And as of 2022, about mid-year, we have about 175 calls. Specifically, we've been looking at Delta 8 THC calls, and we virtually had none in 2020 and 2020, except for near the end in the fall. In 2021, we had 88 calls. And so far this year, we've had 52 exposure calls related to Delta 8 products. If you look at the groups, we've had in the toddler age group about 24 cases. 6 to 12-year-old age group, 6 cases. These were accidental exposures, of course. They're certainly not trying to get a pharmacological effect from it. Ages, the teenage age group, about 17, and then greater than 19, 88 of the 140 calls. Again, watching trends primarily. If you look at those 140 cases, 127 of them were able to be managed in the emergency department due to adverse complications associated with those exposures of Delta 8. There were 19 that were admitted to non-critical care unit beds overnight, and 5 were admitted to critical care unit beds due to those exposures. And if you look at some of the signs and symptoms that we're looking at with these products, again, not always knowing what they're getting out of these products, which is always a challenge from my perspective in any of these cases. Much of it has been central nervous system. We find with the adults, tends to be more anxiety or agitation. The kids tends to be more central nervous system depression. Many have rapid heart rates. Certainly some other findings depending on what data were given by the healthcare teams, because not all these are certainly from the University of Virginia. They also include Central and Southwest Virginia hospitals, 42 hospitals to be exact. Some of the products that we've had exposures to and products that I'm seeing with my collegiate students too. This was one of the first products that we had exposure to in an adult with adverse complications who was treated in our emergency department, Delta 8. These were pre-hemp pre-rolls for smoking. Most of the products that we're seeing look like this. These are products that have been bought in Charlottesville by my fellows who have gone out exploring the various shops. This is known as Weedos, hemp-derived. These gummies, you see there's Delta 10, there is THC V, there's THCO products that are out there. There's shrooms that are being infused with THCP that are on the market, and these are all 2 blocks from the University of Virginia's main campus. This is just one shop's collection of products. It's different vaping devices that we're seeing. These are some products that we recently had with exposures with adverse complications, from gummy rings to space cods. And this is one where we had a toddler who got into these. These were Delta 8, 25 milligrams gummies. Found these and ate a number of them and was hospitalized overnight. You all know, and I'm not going to belabor this, some of the differences. I think there's confusion at times by the public, including talking to the parents when we dialogue with them on this. And I'm sure many of you know about the report from the CDC Health Advisory in September of 2021, when they talked about the emergency department seeing more of these cases. And certainly my colleagues and I have been talking about this extensively and seeing these as they were doing surveillance with some of the first reports. And we also started to see these in the fall of 2020, especially Delta 8, but more edibles, which is why we're seeing the toddlers getting into these products. And there's a lot we still do not know on the health impacts of these, of Delta 8, Delta P, Delta O. There's a number of different variations depending on the chemical structure. For those of you who might remember, I certainly do well in 2009, when we started to see synthetic cannabinoids such as spice and K2. We never saw toddlers or young kids getting into those products because those were primarily smoked. And so in my practice of 23 years here at the University of Virginia, I got to admit, I have not seen young toddlers getting into THC products quite like I'm seeing right now. And part of it is the packaging that we are seeing, and some of them that are mimicking candies and have been, from my standpoint, problematic. And for that, I'll pause to see if you have any questions.
Any questions from members of the task force? I have one, and I don't know how involved you are on each of these on a case-by-case basis, but when you look at, certainly when you look at the younger kids, I would assume those are accidental in nature. They find them around the house, think they're candy or whatever, but when you talk to or when you look at those, maybe specifically in that 19 and up category, who likely purchased this product, are you finding that those are more, I guess, less on the accidental side? They went seeking some sort of outcome, and it didn't necessarily perform the medical benefit that they were hoping for, or what do you typically see kind of in that space?
Yeah, so certainly in the toddler age group, those are accidental. The 6 to 13 age group, one of those cases was using it for psychedelic properties. The other ones were accidental, misidentifying them as candy. When you got over 13, all of them were doing it for the psychedelic properties. Last fall, I had 3 University of Virginia students, not to call them out, but came in because they purchased some of these products for the same reason, and had marked anxiety, rapid heart rates, felt like their heart was going to come out of their chest. We managed those too, and I'm a bit stunned. Again, I haven't seen this since the bath salts and the synthetic cannabinoids were around the campus, where I can go to multiple shops, find these products, and I'm about ready to see 25,000 students come back to the University of Virginia, anticipating some problems. The other thing is, in talking to the shop owners, really intriguing as they start to talk about the different THC products. We see Delta 8 will make our drug screen positive initially, but when it's confirmed by GC mass spec, it's actually negative. It's the first time that we saw that. Typically, when you see a positive, it's a true positive. And that's where we did our own essay to be able to find out, what this might look like on a spike. But they're selling these in some of these shops with a specific advice that if you buy Delta P, for example, and whether this is true or not, this won't make the drug screen positive. And so, just recently, just today, my fellows were out, and there's this. It's kind of like a ropes, right? You get these. This is specifically, Buds Burn dope rope. And it looks like a candy rope. It's colorful. And then there's also this that they just bought, and this is literally 2 blocks from our shop. This is the THC rocks, and these are the candies that you put in your mouth and they pop. There's all kinds of flavors that you can use with these too. Um, but certainly concerns with the collegiate campuses, high schools for abuse potentials.
Thank you. Any other questions? Doesn't look like it.
Great. No, thank you. If there's certainly anything I can do for your group, please let me know in regards to data or what we're seeing clinically. We're the ones taking care of these patients when they're coming into the hospitals, trying to manage them at small rural hospitals. So,
What region do you typically, I guess, see your patients from?
Yeah, so we, the Blue Ridge Poison Center covers all the central and southwest Virginia. So we're Mary Washington to Winchester, Lynchburg, Wise, approximately 3 million of our population that we're covering. So what you're seeing in data is from our center itself. I know the other centers are seeing this also. Many of we manage all the critical access hospitals, so very remote, rural, trying to be managed by family medicine docs when these PEDS cases come in, which are a bit of a challenge for them, and that's why some of those get transferred to us to manage at our pediatric hospital.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
All right. Next, we will move on to Jonathan Miller. There are few individuals who have been more influential in the development of the U.S. hemp industry than the U.S. Hemp Roundtable's General Counsel, Jonathan Miller. Upon helping found the Roundtable and its sister organization, the U.S. Hemp Authority, Jonathan has served as the industry's leading advocate for hemp and CBD legislation on the ground in Congress and in dozens of state legislatures. So, Mr. Miller, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, and to Mr. Chairman, all members of the task force. I'm grateful for this opportunity to share with you my thoughts on this really important subject. I'm a recovering politician. I was the state treasurer of Kentucky for 2 terms. I ran for governor, and the people of Kentucky overwhelmingly decided that I should be in the private sector. So I started practicing law and kind of came upon hemp by happenstance. The then Agriculture Commissioner of Kentucky asked me to help him pursue legalization of hemp in Kentucky in 2013. We were successful and began to start working with Senator Mitch McConnell on the federal level for legislation. In 2014, not only was it Senator McConnell, but also Congressman Goodlatte from Virginia played a key role as chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. We were able to set up pilot programs for hemp. And then ultimately by 2018, we're able to achieve full legalization of hemp, as well as hemp's cannabinoids, extracts, and derivatives, which are subjects of this hearing today. In the last couple years, we've been working closely with Congressman Morgan Griffith from Virginia, developing legislation that would ensure that CBD and other hemp extracts would be regulated by the federal government, by the FDA, as dietary supplements and as food and beverage additives. Once Congressman Griffith's legislation ultimately is successful, a number of the issues that are at discussion today will hopefully be remedied with sound oversight and regulation from the FDA. I joke that in this past decade that I've been tempted to go to the courthouse in Lexington and change my name officially from Jonathan Miller to Jonathan Hemp is not Marijuana Miller. Because so much of what I talk about, have been talking about over the last decade, whether it's to bodies like yours, legislatures, Congress, bankers, social media companies, is trying to explain the difference between hemp and marijuana. And when we worked on the 2014 and 2018 Farm Bills, the underlying theme was that hemp was non-intoxicating and that marijuana and adult use cannabis was intoxicating. And that hemp and hemp products like CBD could be sold at retail to consumers and with regulation. been that intoxicating compounds would be limited to adult use cannabis markets and more strictly regulated and limited to adults. We do not oppose the sale of adult use cannabis. We don't believe in prohibition. We want to draw a real distinction here between non-intoxicating hemp and intoxicating products. Unfortunately, when we developed the 2014-2018 Farm Bill, we were using the science and policy knowledge at the time, came up with a measurement of 0.3% delta 9 THC or less. We weren't aware of what delta 8 or delta 10 or many other compounds that your previous witness mentioned at the time. And some folks have been using that loophole as a way to sell those products at retail. We applaud this commission, this task force. We applaud the legislature for taking a step to distinguish between non-intoxicating and intoxicating products and to crack down on the retail sale to children of intoxicating compounds. I know many of you were quite shocked at the last testimony. We saw products that were the subject of poison control investigations that had 68 milligrams of THC per product. Others were 20 milligrams, 25 milligrams. I can tell you from personal experience that 4 milligrams knocks me on my back. 20, 25, different in different people, but that is a lot of intoxication, and certainly is a lot of intoxication for children. That's why those products must be kept out of the retail space. They must be kept out of the hands of children and must be regulated in a way that only adults can purchase them, and only adults, and that they're regulated in a way that we know that there is health and safety. The key challenge, though, here is, where do we draw the line between intoxication and non-intoxication? The science isn't perfect on this yet, and we have to come up with some principles to divide between non-intoxicating products, which can be sold at retail, which can be sold to broader audiences, and intoxicating products that should be more strictly regulated and sold in adult use cannabis channels. Now, on this issue, we disagree with the approach of the Virginia legislature because where the Virginia legislature, either by kind of conflating these products or not understanding the details here, basically has said that if a product has any amount of THC, it is going to be subject to more strict regulation. Most products, virtually all products, with the exception of some very rare CBD isolates, have something of THC. They have trace levels of THC. They have less than 0.3% THC. Most products fall between somewhere between very trace to about 2 milligrams of THC per serving. Those products don't get you high, and they do not find their way into poison control centers. We are unaware of any danger that is imposed in any municipality, any hospital of these sorts of products. They have been proven to be safe by numerous studies that have been funded by the industry as well as by academia. CBD is something that other countries have gone forward, and Canada most recently, Australia, Great Britain, and have come up with regulatory regimes. And hopefully with Congressman Griffith and others' leadership, we will have federal regulation of CBD here in this country. Now, any amount of THC is the wrong measurement, as I mentioned earlier. What's the right measurement? What we suggest for you, for Virginia to do, is to go through the same process that Colorado has just launched. And what they have done in Colorado is they've created a commission to intentionally study the topic of intoxicating compounds and make recommendations on science-based standards for assessing what levels of these compounds are likely to cause intoxication and what restrictions are appropriate. We think this kind of commission should have broad representation from across the hemp and adult use cannabis industries. regulators, manufacturers, refiners, retailers, laboratories, consumer nonprofit organizations, and adult use patients. That's what's missing from this task force. A fully representative commission will ensure that all stakeholder viewpoints are captured. And I do also encourage you to involve the hemp industry in Virginia. The Virginia Hemp Coalition, led by Jason Amatucci, is very knowledgeable about these issues and especially knowing what farmers out in the state are caring about. Now, once you figure out what this intoxication level is, again, that's where you make the division. And here is where another problem with the statute is. We strongly believe that intoxicating products should be subject to age restrictions. They should be kept far out of the hands of minors. But we strongly disagree that non-intoxicating compounds, the kind of CBD and full spectrum extract products that, again, are sold every day across the country without incident, should not be subject to age restriction. It's bad for farmers, businesses, and consumers. These products are not intoxicating and should not be subject to the same sales restrictions like marijuana or alcohol. Now, the reason why is many or most retailers will choose not to carry hemp products if age restrictions force them to review certificates of analyses or segregate full spectrum hemp extract products and possibly other products from the hemp product inventory. Coupled with the burden of checking photo ID prior to selling these products, retailers might choose not to carry them altogether, which would hurt farmers and business owners of every size in Virginia and the rest of the country who are engaged in this industry, as well as consumers in the state who are clearly demanding access to these products. Age restrictions also send an inaccurate and inappropriate message to consumers that these safe health and wellness products are dangerous or should be associated with a vice of some sort. And similar to the lack of evidence indicating that hemp products are being abused or misused by the general population, we are also unaware of abuse or misuse by minors. Indeed, for consumers, even younger consumers, it makes little sense from a financial standpoint, purchasing or ingesting a whole bunch of products at the same time, or from a consumption standpoint, given that ingesting a great deal of product is likely to result in physical ailments such as diarrhea and upset stomach rather than a high. Thus, in addition as a result, we strongly encourage you in future legislation to limit age restriction to intoxicating adult use products. There are other issues that I've submitted with the testimony that fall along these lines. For example, HB 30 required that any product that has any amount of THC have child-resistant packaging. Only 2 states do that with hemp across the country because, again, by nature, these are non-intoxicating products and do not pose the same safety issues as adult use products. Child-resistant packaging increases the cost significantly for manufacturers and distributors and then ultimately consumers. And this is clearly an example of a regulation that is very appropriate for intoxicating compounds, but unfair and unduly burdensome for safe, healthy, non-intoxicating compounds. Finally, HB 30 mandates that there must be any of these products that have any amount of THC cannot be sold or offered for sale unless they're accompanied by a certificate of analysis produced by an ISO IEC 17025 accredited independent laboratory that provides the THC concentration. In effect, the law appears not only to require THC or hemp products be conducted by such an accredited library, but also that an actual certificate of analysis be presented at the time of sale. This is the type of, again, restriction that might be appropriate for intoxicating compounds, but is unduly burdensome for non-intoxicating compounds. I'll stop with just my final comment that I never did change my name, but if I do, it will be more along the lines of Jonathan. Hemp is not intoxicating Miller because we want to impress upon this panel and press upon the legislature that we need to treat these subjects differently, that there certainly is a public health crisis when it comes to these intoxicating compounds, that we need to regulate them and keep them out of the hands of minors. But safe, non-intoxicating hemp products should be available at retail. They're very popular and they help so many people across the country, consumers, and certainly help the growing hemp industry in Virginia. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Any questions from members of the task force? Mr. Miller, so I understand that you all support legalizing intoxicating THC-9 marijuana, and I know your Jonathan Hemp is not intoxicating Miller. So do you all also support hemp that is intoxicating being sold kind of in the same way that you're hoping that marijuana at some point is legalized to being sold? Or do you kind of draw the line if there is a non-THC-9 product, for example, THC-8, THC-10, what have you, which is hemp, do you all support having that be available for sale in any manner?
Yeah, we want a line drawn that only non-intoxicating products, whether they come from hemp, whether they're Delta 9 or Delta 8, they at non-intoxicating levels, those are the only products that should be sold at retail. Those are the only products that should be sold to broader audiences. Anything that's intoxicating should be restricted and sold in adult use cannabis channels. Now, we don't want to see prohibition. We don't want to see a new criminalization of these intoxicating compounds. But we urge you all we urge the legislature to develop a regime that takes these intoxicating compounds, comes up with a strict regulatory structure, ensures with belt suspenders that these are kept out of the hands of minors, and protects the consumers in that way.
So an intoxicating THC-8 product, what you're saying, should follow the same laws as an intoxicating THC-9 product?
Yeah, I don't see any difference to why any cannabinoids. We don't draw any lines between 8 or 9 or 10. Where we draw the lines is this going to get you high? Is this an intoxicating product? And so that's where we would draw the line.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions? Yes, Ms. Swan.
Good afternoon. This is Caroline Jaron with the Virginia Board of Pharmacy. I had a question for you, if I can.
Sure.
So if there are no laboratory certificates of analysis, I'm just wondering what type of oversight would you advocate for a consumer, for instance, to ensure that they are getting what they think they are getting, or even a regulatory agency perhaps assigned with oversight for those products to ensure that what's actually getting sold on the market is indeed what it's labeled as opposed to a circumvention perhaps by a bad actor?
Great. It's a great question, and I didn't elaborate on this in my testimony. I do in my written testimony. But what we would like to see Virginia do is, instead of having to present that certificate of analysis at the time of sale, instead allow that presentment to happen through a QR code or a URL on a product's label, so that a consumer can come up and take their phone and be able to identify that COA online. This is what most states do, and we would love to see Virginia follow that lead.
And I apologize, I've been butchering your last name. Sorry.
You butchered Miller?
No, not yours, sorry.
Yeah,
Hemp is not marijuana, Miller. We got that. Yeah, go ahead.
Right.
I think Ms. Williams has a question.
Well, sure, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I have a follow-up.
Yes,
I was
please.
debating on whether to ask it or not, but since you'll give me the opportunity, sure.
Yeah.
So on the QR code, I guess, what's the independent oversight to ensure that the QR code is going to a valid certificate analysis? Because I think we've all probably read that there are inappropriate COAs out there that are getting used that may not necessarily accurately reflect the content of that package. So I guess from a regulatory oversight standpoint, how do we ensure that the QR code is going to a valid COA in that suggested model?
Excuse me. I think you run into the same issue of whether a COA is valid or not, whether it's presented in paper, whether it's presented in a QR code. We completely agree that it has to come from an accredited laboratory, and would encourage regulators to periodically make checks to ensure that when the QR code comes up with a COA, that it is coming from an accredited laboratory, and that following up to make sure that laboratory agrees that they did produce that document. What we're complaining about, trying to seek improvement, is that having that paper with every presentation is going to be costly. I do have another suggestion, and this is an area that we would love to talk with regulators. As was said in my introduction, I'm not only the General Counsel for the U.S. Hemp Roundtable, I'm also the General Counsel for the U.S. Hemp Authority, and that is the industry's self-regulatory organization that provides high standards and best practices for products. We use a third-party independent certifying body that companies come through and have to meet our very rigorous standards for good manufacturing practices, which go well beyond the COA, and audited by this third party. And when they succeed, they're able to put a label on their product that says that this product complies with a GMP and with state and federal law. We would love to work. We're working right now with New York. We've been having conversations with Colorado and California. We'd love to work with Virginia on using the U.S. Hemp Authority as a tool for your regulators to have more comfort that, particularly when products are being manufactured out of state and you don't have the time to go to Colorado to try to inspect a facility, that at least there is a stopgap of self-regulation that is helping ensure that these products are safe.
Yes, Ms. Williams.
Thank you. Hi, Mr. Miller. This is Erin Williams with the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. Thanks for your time this afternoon. I was wondering if you could give us a little information about the recently introduced federal legislation that you did reference earlier in your testimony. Does that legislation draw a line between intoxicating and non-intoxicating products? And if it does, where is that line?
So there's two general pieces of legislation. There are three bills that virtually do the same thing. They provide a regulatory framework for CBD as a dietary supplement, food and beverage additive. And the bill that's most mature is the one that Congressman Griffith leads. It's HR 841, and it would have CBD regulate. It would have the FDA regulate CBD as a dietary supplement. We believe that once the FDA starts applying the standards of dietary supplements to CBD and other hemp extract products, that it will allow it to crack down on products that have higher levels of intoxication, in that the FDA views THC in high levels as an adulterant. So that legislation will go a long way. Another set of legislation that is led by Congresswoman Pingree from Maine is called the Hemp Advancement Act. And the Hemp Advancement Act would close this loophole that the Delta 8 manufacturers have been able to get around. It would, instead of having a 0.3% Delta 9 THC limit for hemp, it would set a 0.3 total THC limit. And so that would ensure that Delta 8 products, Delta 10 products could be sold, but they would have to have less than 0.3%. And you're not going to get 25, 30 milligram per serving products like that. So we're hopeful that both the pieces of legislation in some form or another will be attached to the 2023 Farm Bill, and we'll be working with our your congressional delegation to make that happen. Again, we're very grateful to have Congressman Griffith as one of our champions.
So just to clarify, you all do support that language of a 0.3 total THC?
Yeah, on the federal level. We are asking that things above that not be criminalized. Again, we don't think prohibition is the right approach, but we do agree with what that suggests. We also are proposing that the federal government do what I suggested that you all do, which is we'd like to see a federal commission develop scientific standards. At 0.3, is even a bit wishy-washy itself. How many milligrams is that? And some will say it's more than others. And we would like to have this federal commission and state commissions go through the process of saying, okay, tincture products should have X milligrams per serving and per package. Tablet products different, edibles different, and we're hopeful to have federal standards so we don't have 50 states having different standards.
Thank you. Anybody else? Thank you, sir.
Hey, thank you for your time. Thanks for listening.
Before we move on to Aaron, I see that we have the Blue Ridge Poison Control Center still on. I had a question if he's still there, if we could go back to him. If he's still, I think I see him still there. Mr. Holsedge, are you still there? That's okay. That's okay. All right, we'll move on to Aaron Williams.
It's good to see you all again today. Again, Aaron Williams with the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. I manage the state's industrial hemp registration program. Last time we met, I spoke with you all about what some states are doing with respect to the regulation of hemp products. We covered Colorado, Oregon, and New York, three states that have fairly comprehensive regulatory framework for hemp products that contain cannabinoids. We also heard at that meeting suggestions from the public that we take a look at what some other states are doing with respect to hemp products or products containing cannabinoids, specifically Delta-8 THC. So this afternoon, I'm going to give you some information about what I found regulators in Tennessee, Florida, Kentucky, West Virginia, Maryland, and North Carolina to be doing. We are going to do a very high-level review of what's going on in those states. I'll talk about who's regulating the products from what I could tell in my research, what types of products they're regulating, what the requirements are for those products, and then if the state had any specific response to synthetic cannabinoids or intoxicating hemp products. As my presentation last time, this does not cover every requirement to participate in the industry in that state. Again, it's a high-level overview to give you a snapshot of what's going on in some of the other states that we didn't talk about at our last meeting. The majority of the states with which I interacted, or my colleagues in the food safety program interacted, acknowledged that synthetic cannabinoid products or intoxicating products are being sold in their state. Their response, you'll see, has varied in an attempt, as every agency is doing. The attempts that they're making are different in order to ensure consumer safety or address complaints. So to start off, we'll look at Tennessee. We heard at our last meeting that Tennessee had a structure that was desirable to some in Virginia's hemp industry. The Tennessee Department of Agriculture's Manufactured Food Program provided us some information with respect to what they're doing. They explained that Tennessee does not have a law or regulation specific to cannabis derivatives. Because the law does not have an explicit prohibition against cannabis derivatives in ingestible products, the Tennessee Department of Agriculture made a policy decision that cannabis derivatives from industrial hemp may be added to food and beverage products, with the exception of grade A dairy products. Under that policy decision, the Tennessee Department of Agriculture's expectation is that cannabis derivatives will come from an approved source, which means an entity that's been inspected, an inspected food manufacturer, an entity inspected by the Food Regulatory Authority in their state. The Department of Agriculture in Tennessee does review and approve a manufacturer's process to convert CBD into Delta-8 THC, and they explain that they have one manufacturer that has gone through that approval process in Tennessee. In Tennessee, cannabis derivatives must be disclosed on the food or beverage products ingredient level, and the Tennessee Department of Agriculture does not regulate the THC content of those ingestible products. Tennessee also addresses inhalable products through the Tennessee Department of Agriculture's tobacco program, and they regulate the retail sale of smokable hemp in accordance with the Prevention of Youth Access to Tobacco, Smoking Hemp, and Vapor Products Act. And the net of that act is that there should no sales or possession of a smokable hemp product by anyone under 21 years of age. So moving on to Florida. Florida, as we talked about last time, the terms are important.
Ms. Williams, I think we just have one question before we move on from Tennessee. Sorry.
I'm sorry. When you say that no sale or possession to a person under 21 for the inhalable products, is that also for all of these products or just the ones that are inhaled?
That restriction was specific to the inhaled products, and there was not information provided, or I didn't gather any information specific to any age restriction on ingestible products, but I can certainly follow up on that.
So it's possible in Tennessee that you can have Delta-8 edible products that are legal for anyone, not necessarily those over 21 then?
It's possible in that an age restriction was not presented to me
Gotcha.
in my research.
All right, sorry, thanks.
Yeah.
One question also.
Yeah.
So it seems like they have not done direct legislation legalizing or prohibiting these products. Is that correct?
There is no legislation has passed. I believe that the legislature has considered a variety of different pieces of legislation related to hemp products, but there's nothing in existing code or regulation that prohibits a cannabis derivative in a food.
Are they in, would it be safe to say they're in a similar posture as what Virginia currently is? Or how would it differ with what's?
So we differ from what I can tell in that Virginia has identified the specific path for a cannabis derivative to becoming an approved food ingredient. It does not seem that that's part of the analysis happening in Tennessee. They have said it appears that their approach is there's not a ban on it. So as long as we have an approved source for that ingredient can be present in a food or beverage. Whereas with Virginia's law, we acknowledge the federal law that requires that a food include approved ingredients and that those ingredients come from an approved source. And because there's not federal law, as Mr. Miller highlighted, there's not federal law specific to cannabis derivatives in food and beverage. Virginia set up a law specific to cannabis derivatives found in industrial hemp and set up a pathway for those ingredients to be approved and a pathway for those ingredients to come from an approved source so that we have the same kind of constructs that exist on the federal level that apply to all other food and beverage.
Thank you. Anybody? Yes. We may just stop between each state if that's not too difficult. Yep. Please.
I wanted to get some clarification, if I could, regarding the statement TDA does not regulate THC content in products. So is that to say that they have no requirements for testing, labeling, a maximum cap? What can you speak or know on that subject?
That's the statement that I pulled from the information provided by the food manufacturing program at the Tennessee Department of Ag. I interpret that to mean their law, their regulation, their policy does not establish a percentage, a permissible percentage of THC in a product that's derived from hemp. I would further kind of estimate that the expectation is that it's aligning with that 0.3, that the products not exceed the 0.3% THC that is applied to the crop and has kind of been nationally accepted as the product limit.
And just to follow up,
Please.
but do you think that there's testing requirements in place? So does anyone really know what is actually in the products?
The Tennessee Department of Agriculture collects certificates of analysis and uses those to identify whether a source is approved. Beyond that, they haven't provided additional information as to their expectation with respect to contaminants or potency.
Great, thank you.
Yes, Ms. Clay.
And this is for Aaron, and may put Ryan on the spot too. It's about grade A milk. As far as Virginia is concerned, with everything, like I know with the regs that just got put up that will go into effect very shortly, you can add this to milk in Virginia, correct? Okay, I would appreciate that since we have some shared jurisdiction when it comes to grade A milk. I hadn't thought about milk, so I'm glad, Aaron, you brought it up.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions on Tennessee? And I think I'll underscore a point that Ms. Williams said. We acknowledge that she is not an expert in any one of these states, so we appreciate you doing this research, and certainly if there are questions from members of the task force that kind of relate more specifically to what other states are doing, while she may not have all the answers, we are happy to, between either Ms. Williams or VDAX or other folks on this task force, we're happy to kind of delve deeper into other topics. Yes.
Yes, I would be happy to do additional research to pull additional information. The challenge that we have is that when there's not a law or a regulation in place that I can read and explain to you, and instead it's a summary of a policy decision, some of the details aren't conveyed, but doesn't mean that they're not there. So I can certainly seek out additional details with respect to the age restrictions. All right, so moving on to Florida. As we talked about last time, the terminology used when thinking about regulating products or regulating products is important to know what you're capturing or what you're not capturing. And so I've highlighted how Florida is defining hemp extract. So they talk about hemp extracts intended for ingestion or inhalation. And the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services has some authority over ingestible and inhaled products. The definition that Florida has adopted both in their this is from their regulation, I believe, is there on the screen for you: a substance or compound intended for ingestion, containing more than trace amounts of cannabinoid, or for inhalation, which is derived from or contains hemp and which does not contain other controlled substances. The term does not include synthetic CBD or seeds or seed-derived ingredients that are generally recognized as safe by the United States Food and Drug Administration. In Florida, there are distribution and sales requirements that apply to hemp extracts intended for ingestion and hemp extracts intended for inhalation. There's some batch testing requirements. There are packaging requirements for those products, including that those products bear a barcode or a QR code that links to a certificate of analysis for the batch from which the product originated. There is a requirement that an expiration date appear on the package, and there's a requirement that the number of milligrams of each marketed cannabinoid per serving appear on the package. In Florida, those hemp extracts intended for ingestion or inhalation may not exceed established contaminant limits. Florida has a lengthy list of contaminants, including pesticides that may not be present in these products. Some of them are the same. Some of the limits are the same for both products. Some of the limits are distinct for an ingestible product versus an inhaled product. There's some regulation or requirement specific to products intended for ingestion. Those products must be manufactured by an approved source. And in Florida, that means it's meeting the food safety or health standards in the jurisdiction of origin. There are some specific requirements for products intended for inhalation. Those must be manufactured by a source that's permitted to manufacture. There are some prohibited substances for those products, including vitamin E acetate. And products intended, hemp extracts intended for inhalation may not be sold to a person under 21 years of age. Let's see. Questions about where Florida is?
Yes. So, and again, maybe I need to assume, since it's not spelled out, that it's not really clear. But again, the age limit, it looks like it's just for the inhalation. So for products that can be eaten, are there age restrictions of 21 years of age? Do you know, or?
I will review the code again and follow up. If I didn't put it in the slide, it likely didn't jump out at me. It doesn't mean it's not there, so I'm not gonna give a yes or no. I will do a follow-up.
Gotcha, very good, thank you. And I know, like Parker said, I know you're not the expert on all things Florida, but I appreciate it. It's just interesting that it would spell out 21 for inhalation, but not for ingestion, so interesting, thank you.
Sure.
I had one question, kind of to the point Ms. Joran was making earlier. With regards to the certification of analysis, did you see anywhere, is there a standard for the analysis that should be submitted, a requirement for the labs that are doing the certificate of analysis? Is there certain information that certificate of analysis must include, or is it just simply a certificate of analysis?
I'll need to do a follow-up to get you
Okay.
the precise requirements. My best guess and recollection is typically when you see a required certificate of analysis and a required or an established contaminant list, there's the expectation that the information being presented with respect to the product aligns, presents or aligns with the requirements of that product. So it's possible that the requirement spells out what contaminants must be listed on the COA, but I will do a follow-up on that too.
Yes, please. I'll start with Ms. Joran.
Just two thoughts that I have. One, I am curious if you, and you may not know the answer to this, but do you think that the 21 age limit on the smokables is perhaps in part due to the decarboxylation that could be converting and thus perhaps increasing the THC concentration? I should probably look to my lab friends down the table. So I just wonder and speculate if that's a possibility. And perhaps that was sort of the logic and rationale behind that. Do you mind commenting on that, if that's all right, for just 1 second? Or am I just way off base?
It's a possibility. It would depend on the temperature that it gets up into in the vaping device. I honestly don't remember the temperature at which the conversion happens, where THC acid is converted over to delta.
Could you just speak into the microphone? Getting waves from AT over here.
It's a possibility. It would depend on the temperature of the vaping device because they can be operated at variable temperatures. I don't remember the temperature at which that conversion happens from THC acid to THC, but I don't know why they did the 21 versus.
And then the only other thing that's confusing me a bit is the conversation about intoxicating products versus non-intoxicating products. If industrial hemp is supposed to be capped at 0.3%, how do you get intoxicating products from a cap of 0.3? I mean, and do we allow for that here in Virginia currently? And this is just for my own understanding.
We think where we are nationally with respect to the availability of intoxicating products that may be derived from hemp, because the federal law establishes the permissible threshold based on delta 9 THC. So hemp, as far as federal law is concerned, may be no more than 0.3% Delta 9 THC. And so that has been transferred, that threshold has been transferred to the products and to industries manufacture of those products. So so regulators and industry are looking at the Delta 9 THC in a product, analyzing that, getting that number, and using that to assess whether that product may or may not be compliant.
So then is it fair to say that when there is reference to a intoxicating hemp product, then it's going to likely have something other than Delta 9? It's going to be another Delta THC derivative. Is that how I should think of this?
That's one way. That's one piece of it. So there may be other THC or tetrahydrocannabinols in the product that and at a level at which is intoxicating. It may be because that product has no more than 0.3% Delta 9 THC, but because we're looking at percentage and not looking at a milligram amount of, or we're not assessing the THC using milligrams based on the weight of that product, it's compliant yet and only contains Delta 9 THC, but may also be intoxicating because we're using a percentage to assess compliance, or industry or regulator is using a percentage versus a milligram.
No? Good. Very good. And I did also, Ms. Jackson, we haven't forgotten about you. If you have any questions, please just feel free to chime in up there. She's participating virtually.
Oh. Thank you.
Sure.
I have one.
Yes.
One last one, and again, I know you may not know, but within Florida, does their Department of Ag, are they the ones that regulate and enforce violations, do you know, or what is their role versus other agencies?
From my research, it appears that the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services is responsible for enforcing these distribution and sale requirements.
Anybody else before we move on to Kentucky? All right, please.
All right, in Kentucky, the Kentucky Department for Public Health regulates hemp-derived ingestible and cosmetic cannabinoid products. And in Kentucky, cannabinoid is defined as a non-intoxicating compound found in the hemp plant Cannabis sativa. In Kentucky, hemp-derived cannabinoids must be from an approved source. Ingestible products shall have no more than 0.3% Delta 9 THC. They shall not contain THC as their primary cannabinoid. There are labeling requirements for the products, both the total amount of the cannabinoid per serving for an ingestible product or the total amount of the cannabinoid per container for a cosmetic product. The label on these products must include suggested use instructions and a serving size. The products must be packaged with a tamper-evident seal. Kentucky has stated that they have no regulatory framework that currently exists to address synthetic cannabinoids or intoxicating products derived from hemp. Questions about Kentucky?
So just, Mr. Chairman, is that okay?
Yes, please.
Just to be clear then, basically, Delta 8, intoxicating Delta 8 products are completely legal across the board in Kentucky, right?
Well, I think that's my same
not,
question. Yeah.
Right, there is not an explicit allowance for them. There is not, nor is there an explicit ban on them.
So if there's no regulatory framework, then you could walk into a convenience store and probably buy a product legally without age or anything like that.
The products are probably available. Whether law enforcement deems them to be legal, I'm not clear.
Okay, thanks.
So would it also be, I guess, true? So when we say a cannabinoid means a non-intoxicating compound found in the hemp plant cannabis sativa, I have a feeling if that definition was brought before a Virginia committee, somebody would say, how is non-intoxicating compound defined? Is that not defined in Kentucky code?
Not that I saw. No.
Okay.
I think that probably aligns, though, with the restriction on THC being the primary cannabinoid, though. I think those two provisions seem to kind of align with each other.
Just to be clear, is that restriction, it just says shall not contain THC, that's THC generally or Delta-9 THC?
And it's THC as the primary cannabinoid, and it's generally.
So something could, I'm confused. So something could have 0.3%, no more than 0.3% Delta-9 THC, but even still, that Delta-9 THC could not be the primary cannabinoid in a product.
That's how I would interpret those two provisions together.
Okay. Secretary Lohr?
Again, you may not know the answer to this, but when it says there's no regulatory framework addressing this, have there been efforts in their legislature or bills that have failed, or just kind of curious the lay of the land, what's happened legislatively where there's nothing now, but were there attempts, do you know?
I believe that there have been, just within the past year, legislative efforts. Nothing has passed. And so I guess the statement of no regulatory framework is just that, is that there is nothing explicit in their code that establishes Delta-8 is permissible, and this is the way for it to be permissible.
Quickly, what is considered an approved source?
That term is a term used in food safety regulatory programs, and generally means an entity that has successfully completed inspection by the food safety regulator in the jurisdiction in which they operate. And that inspection involves, Ryan can talk to what the inspection involves, but good manufacturing practices and the conditions. You wanna...
Just speak into the mic. Thanks.
Would involve an initial application being approved, which may include details relating to the actual structure of the establishment, as well as the process. The process would need to be approved, and the inspection, as well as their compliant, they would need to be in compliance with all applicable laws and regulations, so that would constitute an approval.
Yes, please.
I was just curious, in the context of perhaps failed legislation having been introduced in the past, do you happen to know in these states, do they otherwise have a cannabis market, either medical or recreational? I know we're talking hemp today, but big picture.
It varies depending on the state, and I don't have the breakdown for you.
That's fine. Thank you.
Any other questions on Kentucky? Okay, West Virginia.
All right, in West Virginia, the Department of Agriculture there registers hemp products as well as manufacturers and retailers of hemp products. And in West Virginia, a hemp product is any product derived from or made by processing hemp plants or plant parts that are prepared in a form available for commercial sale. I'll highlight that this is a product registration program, and it's from the information that was provided to us, it does not appear that there is it's a food safety inspection or the registration results from any kind of food safety or good manufacturing practices related inspection, but is purely a product registration, and there are requirements for those products. There are labeling requirements for hemp products. West Virginia Department of Agriculture does register Delta-8 THC products, where they have, based on a policy decision, drawn the line is that they will not register products containing non-naturally occurring cannabinoids. And the examples that West Virginia Department of Agriculture provided were THCO, ATHC, THCX, and Delta 8O. So again, their line is assessing whether the cannabis plant produces a cannabinoid. If that type of cannabinoid is present in a product, that product is eligible for registration. If the cannabinoid present in a product is not one that the cannabis plant produces, those products are not eligible for registration in West Virginia.
Are they outlawed?
It does not appear that there's an explicit ban. It appears that this is the policy line drawn.
So just to be clear, you register Delta 8 THC products, but if something's been synthesized or made to be an intoxicant, then it's not registered, and it's probably not legal, or?
So they will register a Delta 8 THC product. It doesn't appear that they're assessing whether the Delta 8 that's contained in that product was synthetically derived or whether it was naturally extracted. They draw the line at looking at what the cannabis plant produces or doesn't produce. And if it's a cannabinoid that it produces, regardless of how that ingredient came to be, that cannabinoid can be present in a registered product. The sale of a non-registered or a product that is not registered in accordance with West Virginia law would be a violation of their product registration law.
So essentially, I guess, again, just to dumb it down for me because I'm having a hard time. So essentially, if you've got an intoxicating Delta 8 product, like we've seen some pictures of today, that would also be illegal in West Virginia as well then?
My understanding of the information presented to us from the Department of Agriculture is that there's not an assessment as to intoxicating. It's an assessment as to the cannabinoid, and an assessment as to whether that package and that product meets the labeling requirements.
Again, here, has there been any other attempts at legislation, or do you know?
I don't know. With respect to all of these states, my assumption is there have been varying attempts. This product registration requirement is in law, and I don't know when that came to be, and I don't know with certainty what legislation was considered this past year, but I feel like I've just generally read most states are considering legislation.
Sure. Yes, Ms. Ron.
So does West Virginia, they clearly register the Delta 8 products. Are there any age restrictions? I don't see anything mentioned here.
I'll do a follow-up for you on that. I don't know for sure.
Yes, please, Mr. Priest.
I wanted to get back to Caroline's question earlier before we went on to West Virginia. You asked about if any of these states have legalized cannabis markets. None of the states covered by Aaron's presentation have adult use retail cannabis markets. 3 of the states, West Virginia, Maryland, and Florida, have robust medical programs for cannabis.
Thank you. Okay. Maryland and North Carolina.
Can I ask a follow-up
Oh,
question?
sorry. Yes.
Sorry.
Please.
What is a cannabis market?
Cannabis market is if they've created the availability to purchase cannabis retail, or in the case of a medical cannabis market, through a program where there are medical approvals involved.
So you said that 3 of the states have I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. You said that 3 of the states have medical cannabis markets, but none have retail cannabis markets.
None of the ones that she's covered in this have an adult use retail market to be distinguished from medical cannabis programs.
Got it.
3 of them do.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure.
So I will ask, I do have one more question on West Virginia. So when we look at this, the WVDA registers hemp products, do you know if there's any, aside from, it looks like labeling requirements, WVDA registers Delta-8 THC products, does it appear, at least from your initial research, that there is anything that would prohibit a Delta-8 THC product from making this registry? Are there other sorts of requirements to be registered, or are they simply just providing a list of here are known hemp products that contain Delta-8 THC?
The labeling requirements are extensive and mirror a lot of the food labeling requirements that are established federally for other foods. So it doesn't appear that there is any particular requirement that, by my assessment, would render an otherwise eligible Delta-8 THC product ineligible, but there are pretty lengthy labeling requirements.
Would you categorize this registering as some sort of endorsement of the product, or to make the WVDA registry, are they deeming it to be a safe product, or simply just that it meets the labeling requirements?
Not to speak for our colleagues at the West Virginia Department of Agriculture, but as a regulator, the regulatory perspective would be we are assessing whether a product complies with the requirements established in law, and certainly a registration of a product or a registration of a person to do an activity is not intended to imply the agency's endorsement of that product. Is there public perception that there's an endorsement? Perhaps, but the regulatory agency is simply assessing whether that product or that entity complies with the registration requirements.
Very good. Anybody else? Yes, please.
Sorry, Shane Wyatt from DCLS. I just wanted to follow up on that. Would it be the Department of Agriculture's responsibility to establish a regulatory follow-up framework to ensure that they're meeting those label requirements? As in, like most food safety programs where there are, that the samples are being pulled and analyzed to verify label claims.
That's a good question, and I can't recall from my review of the materials that West Virginia sent whether they also have an inspection program, but I can do a follow-up and see if there's an inspection program that is attached to the registration program.
You didn't realize coming to this meeting you'd have so much more homework afterwards, did you? Thank you for all your work on this.
Been better prepared.
No, you're great. Anything else on West Virginia? Okay, Maryland and North Carolina.
In Maryland and North Carolina, my colleagues in food safety reached out to their peers in those states to assess whether there's a regulatory framework for synthetic cannabinoids. Both states, so we heard back from the Maryland Department of Health, the Center for Food Processing, and they explained that there is no established regulatory framework to allow for the production or sale of food products that contain synthetic cannabinoids. There's no established regulatory framework currently existing to address food products that contain no more than 0.3% Delta-9 THC but deliver an intoxicating amount of THC. In Maryland, they explained that they do consider food containing Delta-8 THC to be adulterated. In North Carolina, the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services Food and Drug Protection Division responded and explained that there's no regulatory framework there that's been established to allow for the production or sale of food containing synthetic cannabinoids, and there's no established regulatory framework to address those food products that have the no more than 0.3% Delta-9 THC but deliver an intoxicating amount of THC. Both states acknowledged the presence of Delta-8 type products in their state, and explained that they address them generally on a complaint basis, complaint-driven basis.
Yes, Mr. Secretary.
So, again, just to make sure I'm clear, so in the state of Maryland, since they consider Delta 8 to be a food adulterate, or the food to be adulterated, then their inspectors work under the same premise that we do, that they could go in and have products removed off the shelves and work the same way that our food inspectors are doing here in Virginia?
I would expect that would be the case. I don't know the ins and outs of Maryland's regulatory response. I don't know if Ryan has additional information with respect to their.
Not at this time, no.
My understanding is generally the food regulatory authorities in states, their activities are all very similar and they mirror federal requirements for all of their food and beverages.
Anybody else on Maryland or North Carolina?
Or in general.
Or in general, yes. I guess this reaches the end of her presentation.
I just
Yes,
have a
Mr.
couple of
Please.
just general questions, just to clarify, Aaron. Instead of going through and asking about each one, I assume that in the presentation you provided whatever information you could get from the statutes or the context there regarding the consumer protections that they have, regarding packaging, labeling. Our new law has provisions about the shape or depiction of products, as well as copycat or lookalike products, trademark infringing products. And since the only things saw in these states reference were some labeling requirements, a tamper evident as opposed to a tamper resistant packaging. So they didn't appear to have anything that we have that's now been put into VCPA.
I would say that the lack of a reference to a similar provision or a provision that mirrors what's now in the Virginia Consumer Protection Act should not be implied that it doesn't exist. Some states had lengthy labeling requirements that may pick up or have the same effect as some of the VCPA provisions, but I wouldn't do a blanket statement that if I didn't put it on here, it doesn't look like Virginia's VCPA.
Yes, Mr. Priest.
Thank you for the presentation. Very informative. In your research, did you find any of the states that you looked at, that you presented today and in the previous task force meeting, did you find anything where they regulated online sales of these products? Because it's a national market, new markets, going online, cheaper way to market your product. And I know that a lot of states dealing with Delta 8 have, because they're particularly protective of youth, have done mandatory age screening, saying that if you're going to market in our state, you must use these mandatory age screening tools. Failing that, we're going to go after you. Did that come up at all in any of your research?
I did notice provisions in some states that explicitly referenced online sales, that the sales applied to both in-person retail and online sales.
Yeah, because I think that's kind of a gap for us right now that we may want to consider.
So other states, you're saying, have requirements for, if they're going to sell to somebody online, they're going to have to collect some sort of identification or some sort of proof that they're 21 or up, or whatever the age limit may be.
So if you even want to look, for example, give a different industry, if you're looking to go to a brewery and you want to check out their hours or what's on tap that afternoon, the first thing that'll pop up will say, "Are you 21
Sure.
or older?" So they're using comparable tools to ensure that whoever's seeking to purchase online is of age.
Sure. Yes, please.
Curious if in your research, any of the states have an ability to regulate out-of-state products, sort of expanding on the online product, but even the products that are coming in. It appears that parity is a gap. You can regulate all you want here in Virginia, but if we're going to continue to have an open door for anyone to ship whatever they want in from out of state, then obviously we still have a concern to address. And I know you and I have talked at different times. I liken it, of course, in my mind to the world of pharmacy, where we regulate non-resident pharmacies. So you hold a registration with Virginia if you're going to dispense and ship prescription drug into Virginia, and we hold you to the same standards that we hold the pharmacies here in Virginia. I know that we don't presently have that, but I'm just curious, do any states in the hemp industry have that? Or are we all sort of at the mercy of products coming in that may not comply with the state standards?
I'll offer that my recollection of the various statutory provisions, I don't have a recollection of reading something that says Florida manufacturers must. However, the language is in the code, as it is in Virginia with Virginia's food and drink law. It is any product manufactured or distributed or offered for sale must meet these requirements. And so those requirements would apply to regardless of where the product originated, if the product is distributed or offered for sale in the state. That's how many of the provisions in Virginia's code work with respect to food, beverage, or other products that the Department of Agriculture registers. My thought is that that's probably how the laws in other states are also drafted to establish requirements that apply to the product, regardless of its where it originated. I think the reality is the regulator has finite resources, and the perception then may be that those rules don't apply to products produced out of state, when in fact they do. It's just more challenging to address those types of products.
Any other questions? I have one. Just out of curiosity, I think you just went through 5, 6 different states. Where did, I guess, the idea for the states to highlight kind of come from?
The last time we met, I presented information on the programs that exist in Colorado, New York, and Oregon. During the 2022 General Assembly session, and hemp industry participants presented the Department of Agriculture with the activity in those states as examples of ways states are regulating hemp products that contain cannabinoids. So I use those 3 states as our starting place. The states that we discussed today were either mentioned by the hemp industry during the public comments received at our last meeting as states that have programs that they looked favorably upon. And then I just decided to pick all of our neighboring states because we're often compared to our neighbors.
So is it safe to say that?
Perspective.
So is it safe to say public comment is very important to this task force and taken seriously and considered?
Most certainly. I mean, I heard multiple comments with respect to the programs in Tennessee, heard comments with respect to the programs in West Virginia, and certainly wanted to dig in and see what was going on in those states and how they got to where they are today, so that the task force can consider that as we move forward with our recommendations.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to again thank Erin and her team. I said this the last time, obviously, this was a heavy lift, and I know you're not an expert in all these states, but thanks for fielding all the questions, and thanks for putting the hours in to gather the information and for your listening sessions that you had recently as well. So thank you. Good job.
Thank you. I will do follow-ups on the points that you all asked about, and I'll add them into our PowerPoint that will then be made available to the public.
Thank you so much, very much. Okay. Does anybody do we need a quick 5-minute break? Keep chugging along? Good? All right. Next, we are going to move into just task force discussions. We have about, just about 80 minutes left. We don't have to use the full 80 minutes that we have left, but do just want to kind of open it up for, I think we've had a lot of good discussion already during our 3 presentations, certainly during that last one as well. I think we kind of dug in on a lot of the topics that are important to this task force. So I will kind of just open it up for discussion. I did send around an email to members of the task force, kind of just with 3 questions that I think kind of go at the heart of what the General Assembly has asked for this report to include. I'll read those questions and then kind of just open it up for whoever wants to kind of start that discussion. The questions that I kind of sent around were, what items or issues dealing with industrial hemp extracts and other substances containing THC do you feel are not adequately addressed in code or by regulations? What obstacles does your agency department face when it comes to enforcement of laws relating to hemp extracts and other substances containing THC? And are there other statutory issues that would be helpful for the task force to request clarity on from the General Assembly? So I know some folks have answers to all these questions, maybe just a few of them. Some folks may need a little bit more time to kind of talk amongst their agency, but kind of just want to kind of use that as a jumping off point. Before we start that, though, I do want to, now that I've given her time to take a sip of her water, I do know that Erin Williams worked hard over the past couple of weeks, and I think met with many of you in 6 listening sessions that she convened on her own. I think they were virtual just to kind of, again, hear public comment from members of the stakeholder input. And if I could, if you could just kind of give a brief overview while other members of the task force maybe consider these questions. But if you can just kind of give a brief overview, what you heard, what stakeholder input you received.
Sure, thank you. Since the task force last met, the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services did hold virtual listening sessions in order to collect input from registered industrial hemp growers, processors, and dealers. Those are the 3 entities that the industrial hemp program registers. Today, what I'll do is provide a summary of the perspectives and the recommendations that I heard from the participants. However, VDAX is not advocating for or against any of these recommendations. If any of the recommendations generates questions from the task force, I would be happy to seek additional information in order to, or information from the industry in order to better inform this group's ultimate recommendations. The 48 individuals attended the virtual listening sessions that we hosted. Another 15 individuals submitted written comments in response to the questions that we posed. We specifically asked the industry to provide feedback on what, if any, requirements were appropriate to ensure the safe manufacture or sale of industrial hemp extracts or substances containing THC that are intended for human consumption orally or by inhalation. Generally, those who commented expressed support for testing, packaging, and labeling requirements for both orally consumed and inhaled products containing THC, and for requiring good manufacturing practices for manufacturers of these products. Many in the industry urged the task force to be mindful of the costs associated with testing and suggested that testing be required at the step in the manufacturing process that will actually ensure a safe product. From the discussion that was had during some of the listening sessions, it does appear possible that the appropriate place in the manufacturing process to test for contaminants may be different depending on the product. Many also expressed the importance of consumer education regarding these products, as well as the importance of the retailer being knowledgeable about the products offered for sale, with some session participants even suggesting that the state should license retailers, and some suggesting that employees of retail locations be required to go through specific training. We also heard comments that regulators, policymakers, and local government officials would benefit from more information regarding hemp and hemp products. Those who provided comments were divided over whether synthetic cannabinoids should be used in orally consumed and inhaled products containing THC. Some expressed that if the manufacturing process and the product ultimately meet established requirements, then those products should be permissible for sale. Some expressed a preference for producing natural, organic, or minimally processed products. Some expressed dismay over the impact that intoxicating products have had on the industry's reputation. Many of the listening session participants and those who submitted written comments expressed desire to see out-of-state manufacturers of the products containing THC regulated in the same way as Virginia manufacturers, with some suggesting that only Virginia-produced products should be allowed for sale in Virginia. Generally, those who spoke in support of reasonable regulations for the products containing THC also emphasized the importance of requiring compliance by all manufacturers, both in and out of state. These are kind of general statements or a general summary of what we heard during our listening sessions and in the written feedback provided. There was not one idea that was echoed or agreed upon necessarily by every participant or every individual I heard from, but I think the summary I've provided today kind of generally captures the sentiment that we heard from industry participants in that they are seeking reasonable regulatory response to products derived from hemp.
Thank you. Before, I got a question real fast, but before we move on, I forgot about this note. He's gone. Is he gone now? Okay. Mr. Halstead was available, but I thought I saw him disappear. Okay, can you, I guess, maybe walk through the pros or cons that I guess folks gave for the point at which a product is tested? I mean, I guess in my mind, why would it not make sense to kind of uniformly have the product as it's produced and ready for a consumer to inhale, eat, drink, whatever? I guess what's kind of the difference in the reasons that it might have to be done earlier?
Sure. So the kind of varying pieces of feedback that I heard and included comments to the effect of, if an inhaled product, if you're doing a soil test, perhaps what's present in the soil, perhaps that's sufficient for the testing requirements that pertain to smokable flower. In the same conversation, I heard disagreement with that idea. I heard if a cannabinoid-containing ingredient is tested at the point of extraction, then there shouldn't also be extensive testing requirements for the end product. If that ingredient is put into gummies or brownies or some other kind of food product, the more extensive testing might be more appropriate at the point of extraction or the ingredient as it's extracted. I think kind of my takeaway, and I apologize to the industry if I have slaughtered the details of the feedback, but the regulatory takeaway is that it's very nuanced. And that there isn't a one-size-fits-all regulatory scheme for these products. And policymakers should be mindful of the nuances in the products.
Thank you. Please.
Just to follow up on that, from the medical cannabis side, and we certainly have testing requirements in place, I don't think that we heard perhaps those similar comments as far as it being so nuanced. And I'm just curious why. Now, granted, in our world, it's getting grown indoors, but it is getting distributed between facilities. So, one is acquiring potentially a product from another. It's tested at the final product formulation before the consumer gets it so that they know that how it's labeled is indeed what's contained in the package. So it's just perhaps just an observation that one would perhaps think that it would be a similar testing need, but maybe there's an element there that I'm not appreciating. So follow-up.
Please.
So could you explain or provide a little bit more information about the point at which the medical programs products must be tested? Is it the end use, a batch testing of the end product?
Yes.
And I'm probably venturing outside of my knowledge base, but could you speak to what those permissible products are? I'm wondering if variation exists because there's candy products, baked goods, beverages.
Well,
Is
we don't
there, and
currently
maybe there's
have any
not an
registered
appropriate distinction.
beverages. But we have edibles and inhalants and topicals and gummies and oils and baked products. So we have a lot of variety of formulations that I would think would be very similar to the hemp industry.
Good, thank you.
Any other questions kind of on the feedback that Ms. Williams heard during her listening sessions? Thank you for doing that. I know that I got many comments from stakeholders saying that they appreciated those listening sessions. I appreciate you doing that very much. Okay, let's kind of open it up for just general discussion in the remaining moments that we have. And I think what the whole point of this is, kind of getting to what this task force has been tasked with by the General Assembly. What are you hoping that is included in this report, if there aren't specific recommendations for, at least hoping that the 2023 General Assembly session could provide clarity on. So I don't know who wants to kind of start that discussion, but I'll just kind of open it up. Not everybody at once.
Okay, I don't mind going first.
Please, thank you.
So just looking at the bullet points that you provided, some items or issues. Right now, we're not dealing with any specific items or issues. We haven't had to do much enforcement from the restaurant side, but some clarity would be how, since a lot of this language is in VDAX's code, how it rolls over to, I'm just going to say food establishments because that's what we call them, and that's everything from your traditional brick and mortar restaurants, just like your McDonald's, all the way to fine dining, to correctional facilities, daycares, adult homes, hospitals, educational facilities, K-12 through college, mobile units, your fun popcorn place at your farmer's market, depending, I know if Ryan's going to say anything, or like fairs and carnivals. We cover a lot of ground where this could be added to food. So we just want to make sure that as we move forward, that we're kind of in line with what the administration expects, but also in line with our sister agency on how exactly we administer our food regulations and do our enforcement so that one industry isn't treated differently as far as like manufacturing versus our industry, which is restaurants, which are also in hotels and things like that. We do have a big stakeholder that's very involved with our regulatory process is Virginia Restaurant, Lodging and Travel Association. They haven't come to us yet with any concerns, but typically when we make changes, we do reach out to them to let them know of new regs, new statutes, and things of that nature. So I foresee potentially them reaching out to say, how will this impact our constituents? And we just want to be prepared.
Yeah. And I think that raises a good point. I think something that we've talked about often is when you see, pop-up style events, whether it could be something as organized as a convention of some sort, or if it's just a pop-up food stand, or any of those things that are here today, gone tomorrow. Certainly, I think if they're if they're selling marijuana, there's a law enforcement component to that. But when we look at other THC products that could be being marketed to children, even in some instances, how do we kind of fend those off from even standing up? I think that kind of gets a little bit to what you're talking about, probably more broadly with restaurants and things of that nature.
Correct, with considering, like you mentioned, with children, and if it's a hemp extract that particular facility gets from, I'm just picking a state, Arizona, because Arizona's regulatory framework matches ours, so they do import it through the internet, and they decided to add it to smoothies or to cakes or, anything that they sell, their sauces for their seafood, their hollandaise sauce, and we're the ones ensuring approved source and things like that for food establishments. We just want to make sure we're in line with what VDAX is doing and expectations. So at this point, I don't know if that would require anything to change in code. Since our last meeting, I talked with my boss and then said, we'll see how this meeting goes. And then milk was brought up, completely forgot about milk. We're going to regroup again, just to make sure that we're on the same page.
Parker, one thing that I took away from Mr. Miller's presentation from the U.S. Hemp Roundtable, products that contain THC at low levels that are completely safe, do we really need that extra step of packaging or age requirements on that? I mean, is it, in some ways, maybe it goes a little too far. If there's a way we can look at those products that are completely safe, but they do have some THC in them, could we make those a little easier to retail?
Yes, please, Mr. Priest.
Wanted to point out Arizona is an interesting comparison, but Arizona has a vibrant adult use retail market where cannabis products from A to Z are sold. So maybe not the most analogous situation to Virginia right now. One thing that I thought was highlighted in our first meeting and was here to a lesser extent was that certainly new enforcement authority, regulatory authority has been granted to address intoxicating products containing hemp-derived cannabinoids. But the language is limited to those that are intended for human consumption, orally or by inhalation. And as Caroline pointed out with respect to what's available in the medical program, this industry is quite ingenious. It's innovative, and there are lots of different ways that humans consume these. So I'm wondering if there should be consideration given to addressing these other means by which people intend to consume these products. You have lotions and other topicals, you have nasal sprays, transdermal patches, tinctures, personal lubricants, suppositories. I mean, you go online, you can see any number of ways that these products are available. I don't suppose you can anticipate every conceivable form of application, but we might want to consider whether there is a way to be more expansive in our approach.
Thank you. Yeah, please.
So I left the last meeting with some thoughts, so just forgive me, but I've just sort of listed them out here. And I think this might follow up a little bit on what Jeremy was just saying, but it is my understanding, and I could get some of this wrong, so just correct me if I have, but it's my understanding that currently we have the oversight for the orally ingested food and drink, but that it would not necessarily include the topical products and the inhalants. So I feel like there's a gap that needs to be addressed so that VDAX has a more expanded scope of authority to properly get at all of the formulations that potentially could hit the market and are on the market. I already mentioned to you about how, in an ideal world, I think it'd be great if we could regulate products coming in from out of state in a similar fashion to the pharmacy industry. It's just what I happen to know. But whether that's viable or not sure. But again, that would be an ideal way to sort of create parity across the board for both in-state and out-of-state products in a more regulated oversight manner. I left the last meeting thinking maybe we still needed some clarification from the OAG regarding whether the sale of Delta 8, including product intended to be inhaled, is a violation of the Consumer Protection Act, and if any enforcement gaps exist there. I'm not sure if there's been any movement on that particular subject, but that was a takeaway from the last meeting that I had. And then, whatever you prefer.
Why don't you just kind of address that point real fast?
Sure. So I think we were able to talk a little bit after the meeting, but not with the with everybody else present. But basically, as folks recognize, the language in the VCPA does not define THC. So our initial assessment is there's no limitation to Delta 9 or Delta 8. There's no qualifications with regard to the amounts. We, of course, heard the presentation earlier about suggesting a distinction between intoxicating or non-intoxicating. So on its face, we interpret it as covering THC, anything that contains THC. Now, there's 4 separate provisions in the VCPA that have been added. One refers to THC, or excuse me, 3 of them refer to THC. A third is structured slightly differently, where it refers to an industrial hemp extract as defined in another section of the code, a food containing industrial hemp extract, or a substance containing THC. So there's a slight incongruity there. We could leave it to the task force whether that should be addressed. But ultimately, there's no definition here for THC. Elsewhere in the code, there are references to THC. Typically, I don't want to overstate this, but typically in connection with defining whether something's considered marijuana or not marijuana, whether it's legal or illegal, it may reference federal law, but none of those definitions aren't incorporated, or those references aren't incorporated here. So, so hopefully that answers part of the question, and that there's no distinction here between Delta 8, Delta 9, other, or Delta 10 for that matter. With regard to human consumption and inhalation, the 4 provisions, 3 of them reference both. I think perhaps understandably, the one provision that talks about depiction, something being in the shape of a human, animal, or vehicle or fruit, that just refers to a food containing those substances. So that's the only place that doesn't reference inhalation. There's nothing that, you didn't exactly ask this in this question, but there's nothing that talks about topicals or, was mentioned earlier, other type of products that wouldn't be inhaled or for human consumption.
If I can follow up on that, just for clarity, and I think for everybody's sake. So when we talk about specifically products intended to be inhaled, I think we established VDAX does not have any kind of authority over inhalable products. Is that right? Correct. Okay. And so with the budget language for the Consumer Protection Act, that kind of referenced more labeling requirements. And I think kind of what we were just getting at is that it did not have any specific definitions. So would it be true that, I guess, we hear if something is properly labeled, since we don't have a clear definition of what, or I guess a clear limit of what would be allowed in an inhalable product through the Consumer Protection Act, if it was properly labeled that it could be 40 milligrams of Delta 8 THC, there wouldn't be anything that would prevent that from going on the shelves or being sold. Is that kind of an accurate example? Do you know?
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
To ask Josh, ask your question in the course of that. So I may need you to repeat some of that, because I don't want to say something legal or illegal. I mean, I can tell you what these provisions say.
I think what you were just kind of saying, there's not a clear definition of THC, but what the Consumer Protection Act did was it put labeling requirements. So if something was just properly labeled, since there was no kind of explicit allowable limits in those products, if it's properly labeled containing a very high amount of THC-8, there wouldn't necessarily be anything that would prohibit that from being sold. Is that right?
Right, not under the VCPA, right?
Okay.
They just have to comply with these requirements.
Right.
Another question of whether contains something such that makes it illegal under criminal laws. Yeah. So sorry for the
I think that's
conversation.
I think that is the kind of a big issue for us, at least in our role as a task force, to point out to the General Assembly is right now it's it seems like there's labeling requirements, but it doesn't matter what is in that product, as long as it's labeled properly, then it would be legal. And so I think that's just kind of an important point to point out. Yeah. Please.
Just a couple more, but I don't want to.
Yeah. No. Does anybody else want to chime in kind of on that point before we kind of continue with Board of Pharmacy? Okay, please.
And then in the context of the discussion for an intoxicating product, which I never thought the hemp program was intending to have an intoxicating product, but certainly things expand, and I don't know where this is all going. But if the percentage does not restrict completely the intoxication or the potential intoxication, and it can potentially be circumvented by the weight, then it makes me wonder if that is another opportunity to potentially, depending on what direction the General Assembly wants to take with the program, should weight be a consideration in addition to the percentage? And then I guess my only other comment would be in the context of, for instance, child-resistant packaging. I certainly appreciate the cost associated with manufacturing, putting a product on the market. My only caution would be if it's such that the individual dose would not necessarily create harm, that would be one thing. But if the packaging allows a child, for instance, to immediately consume 10 tablets or 10 doses of whatever that package is, and then that would contribute to a patient's safety harm, then I think packaging requirements could be appropriate in that situation. So I guess I would just urge everyone to look at what is actually contained in that product to include the total THC or the total harm that could potentially result if a child was to accidentally ingest more than that labeled singular dose that is on the package.
I think that's a fair point, and I don't want to open this up, but I would love to kind of do some research afterwards. I think it was Mr. Miller, hemp is not marijuana Miller, that made kind of that same point about the cost of it. I would like to do a little bit of research, or if anybody, stakeholders, I would like to look at that. I think there's a point to what Secretary Laura's point was about non-intoxicating, CBD products being available to those under 21. Would there be a point of where those products could be available without an age restriction, but potentially still carry some sort of extra safety measure, such as a child-resistant, child-proof packaging, what have you? I think it's a point well taken. In my mind, if there is something that should be allowed, the extra step of making it a little harder to open, I'm not necessarily, I think that could be a good thing. I would like to see some research on like cost differences between a bottle that is not child resistant versus a bottle that, or a packaging that is, and weigh that kind of amongst. I think that, let me say this, I think that would be a good information to include in our report. Anybody have anything else for? Yes, please.
So I want to give a couple of comments here from the laboratory testing perspective, and it's going to touch a little bit on what you said earlier about some of the testing versus the extract versus the final product, and a couple other things. Not all of the states. First thing I wanted to talk about labeling requirements. I would recommend that the labeling requirements be as clear as possible. From a laboratory testing perspective, that's what we're going to have to be testing for. So those are the items we're going to be looking for at the different concentrations, and verification that whatever that product is that's being ingested in the body is safe. And I would recommend that since these are ingestible products, whether it's an ingestion or an inhalation or a topical product, they're all intended to be inside the body in some way, shape, or form. So approaching them from a food safety program, food safety inspection sort of program, might be a good way to go about that, having regular inspections, being able to pull products, having them do regular inspections of the manufacturing plants like they do with the food processing plants now. I think I would recommend several of the states that you've talked about, you mentioned have contaminant lists and contaminant testing that they're allowed. They have allowable levels of certain contaminants. Those lists are very extensive. For the states that are establishing them, Colorado has a list of over 100 pesticides that are allowed within the, with the edible product. So this is a natural product that is then manipulated physically and chemically to produce a final product. So there's several steps in the manufacturing process in there.
Can I ask you a question on that point? So when you look at, you mentioned pesticides and being on a contaminant list, would there be, or would you all have any sort of distinction to be made whether a contaminant was used in some sort of additional process to construct an item, and would the argument, or I guess the thought of, well, it was purified to remove the residual leftovers of that pesticide in this case, how would you, I guess from a lab services perspective, deem that to in a product to be safe or not? I guess ask it in a simpler way. If a pesticide is used to make a product but is believed to be removed from the final product, would there still be dangers in that product once it's in a final form?
Not if it was removed, no. But that would be the testing of the final product to verify that those contaminants aren't there. So, but that kind of brings me back to my other point on the discussion of the testing of the extract versus the final product. Testing the extract is good, but when you've got an extract that's an oil that is then mixed into a final product such as gummies, it doesn't necessarily get distributed evenly. So when you have a bag that has a certain total dosage of THC compounds on it and then a dosage per serving, mixing that at 2 nanograms or 4 nanograms per gummy bear throughout that bag is not an easy thing to do. So from our experience within testing these things, the concentrations from gummy to gummy varies quite a little bit. And so being able to have that label is on there one thing, but being able to meet that label guarantee is more difficult than it looks. And from a laboratory perspective, when we're testing some of these products, whether we're talking about a concentration of THC delta 9 being 0.3 or greater, or an intoxication level, what does the laboratory do with those products that they determine are above that level? Because they suddenly move out of the non-intoxicating hemp product into a Schedule I drug. And there's very specific requirements from the pharmacy board, there's very specific requirements from the DEA on how that is handled, how that is stored, and how that's disposed of. So some guidance on how laboratories would treat and store and dispose of violation samples that exceed that intoxication level.
Any questions for DCLS? All right, and please.
I was just going to offer that we do allow for remediation testing. To your question earlier about the pesticide, if it fails at the first test, they do have an opportunity in regulation to remediate that sample as long as it ultimately passes before the product is headed out to market, then that's fine.
Okay, thank you. Yes, please.
So, Mr. Chairman, from an enforcement perspective, how much, where are these products tested from an enforcement perspective?
They've been coming to us.
Okay. And you test gummies, edibles, ingestibles, inhalants, everything?
Yes. Yes.
And do you test for the THC level, and do you differentiate between 8 and 9?
Yes, we do.
Okay. And just 8 and 9, or all the THCs?
We haven't been asked to distinguish for the rest of them at this point, so far all we've done is 8 and 9.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Where do you, and I see Ms. Jackson has her mute button off, so she may be about to chime in on this, but where, I guess, does DFS and DCLS overlap at all kind of in this space, or is there any overlap? Ms. Jackson?
Hold on, sorry. I'll start, and we have really, for the most part, been deferring to DCLS in this space because it is sort of affiliated with the regulatory process. We generally are only doing the analysis when it is a criminal charge has been filed. And so for most of these gummies and types of things that we've been talking about today, they're not being submitted for testing as part of a criminal trial or criminal investigation. And so that's why they've generally been completely handled at DCLS, who has been doing all of the regulatory testing along the way for the hemp industry.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, so I will say that currently we do not have a method in place for quantitating THC in edibles. We're actually we have a request for proposal procurement that we are working on now to be able to outsource that testing but we haven't been asked to do very many samples at all. It's been very minimal, the amount of requests that we've had from law enforcement to test these type of samples. We do, however, test inhalants, especially vape cartridges, on a regular basis that seem to be more submitted to us more often in relation to some type of criminal investigation.
So and I don't know if the OAG's office or if VDAX and any of their enforcement efforts currently, whether it be through Consumer Protection Act or through somebody selling something that could potentially run afoul of the law, would that then go to you all, so even if it's involving not necessarily an intoxicated person, but a potentially illegal product that would maybe be in the law enforcement realm now? Would that go to you all, or would that still fall with DCLS?
We have had conversations about that, and I could see that it could go either way. DCLS has the same language within the Code of Virginia of being authorized to do testing in criminal events, although usually they are done by DFS. So generally, if law enforcement has done the investigation and is submitting the samples, they would come to us at that point.
Usually, we will, if a law enforcement approaches us for an analysis and it is a purely criminal sort of investigation, we will typically refer them to DFS first to do the testing. And if DFS sends them back to us, then we'll do the testing.
So just to clarify, so make sure everybody understands this, the Virginia Consumer Protection Act is a civil statute. It is enforced by the Attorney General's office. It also can be enforced by Commonwealth's attorneys, as well as local, county, and city locality attorneys, so attorneys for cities, counties, and towns. Commonwealth's attorneys actually have authority to enforce it civilly as well, but it is a civil statute. So it's not a criminal statute. The remedies we can get under the statute are we can sue for injunctions to stop unlawful conduct. We can seek restitution for harmed consumers. We can seek civil penalties up to $2,500 per willful violation. We can recover our attorney's fees and costs and expenses of our investigation. All of those things those recoveries are after we bring in enforcement action. So we're not an agency that assesses fines or levies a fine when we see something. We have to pursue an enforcement action. And while we're on the topic, I'll just give you a little bit more about that framework. We are required by the statute before we sue somebody to give notice that we intend to sue them and give them an opportunity to come into our office and explain that they've not violated the law or to enter into what's essentially a settlement agreement. It's called an assurance of voluntary compliance. If we reach an agreement, that's then filed with a court for approval. Of course, if we bring a settlement could provide for all of the remedies I described, injunction, banning future violations, recovery or payments of funds to the state, et cetera. There are exceptions where there's exigent circumstances where we could proceed without going to court. There are limitations with regard to those categories. But just want to make sure that folks understand this is a civil statute. It's not a criminal statute. So the provisions in the Budget Act regarding our office are civil provisions, not criminal.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Davis.
We obviously enforce the food and drink law, of which industrial hemp is a part. Just as a point of clarification, we do have criminal statutes in the food and drink law, and typically when we have to collect samples and move forward with some sort of enforcement action, we use DCLS, and we've done that for years, and we have actually a mandate in our law that we have to use DCLS. So,
thank you. Anybody else want to chime in kind of on this topic?
I'll chime in. Can you
Please.
hear me? I don't know how close. I guess I can move this. That would be a little bit easier. I know that we've discussed this, but I do think that we need some clarification on the enforcement side when it comes to the criminal investigations and the link to the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office. My concern, and again, comes from my limited experience, is that something could be lost in the interim between the investigation, the seeking compliance, and then ultimately bringing that case to the CA. And I don't know if that clarification comes into a different pathway to arrive at the CA's office, or if that comes in the way of a different penalty, something other than a Class 1 misdemeanor. But just some consideration and recommendation, I think, to the General Assembly is really important there.
It's helpful. Thank you.
While I'm unmuted, I'll go ahead if it's okay.
Please.
One of the things that in the budget language that is not defined is tetrahydrocannabinol, and we were, we were kind of given the marching orders to think about the isomers and so forth from this committee, and so that's just one of the in looking at the areas that are the most problematic for us as an agency. It is knowing in clear terms what the legal status is of the different isomers of THC. And so that's just one of the things that we haven't really talked about too much. And also tetrahydrocannabinols is defined in Schedule 1 in the Drug Control Act, except as present in industrial hemp or in a hemp product or in marijuana, and a couple other things as well. And so it would be beneficial, I think, to have the General Assembly clarify what tetrahydrocannabinol would then now be included in the Schedule 1 definition at this point. And I don't have an answer for that. I just know that is something that we continue to find difficult in the code as it stands now. And then lastly, it might be helpful to refine the definitions of industrial hemp extract and derivative as they're used in the definition of marijuana to try and be clear as to where, if something does cease to become a derivative of the plant material, if that is in fact the case, or if it does remain, no matter what is done to it downstream, if it would then still retain being a derivative or extract of the original plant. I don't know if that all made sense, but those are just things that we have talked about as an agency.
Yes, that's great. Thank you so much. I do have a kind of a question that I've been noodling on over here for a little bit. I am not an attorney, so let's preface by saying that. I know I have a couple of attorneys here. So I think it's clear the point of this task force is to kind of make recommendations, highlight areas where it's unclear where the line is, so to speak. We heard from the U.S. hemp folks that they support a line to allow products that are not intoxicating to be sold. So let's play this out. Wherever the General Assembly at some point draws that line for products that can be offered for sale, whether it's being sold with regulations, whether it's no Delta 8, whether it's all Delta 8, wherever they go with this, who at this point would then be able to enforce that in a way that if there is a clearly dangerous product being sold, who would be the person? I can't imagine, law enforcement would be the best place to go, just looking at stores, pulling items off the shelf that don't meet wherever kind of the General Assembly might eventually make a line. I think Deputy Secretary Cleary makes good points that she's made before about kind of the chain of custody that kind of goes along with those different products. So obviously VDAX kind of has that role now, but is anybody clear, I guess, on kind of the best place for an illegal product? And then I think secondly, maybe that's the question for you would be, who would then be responsible for that? Is that the business owner? Is that the manager? Is that the cashier who is working that day that there is an illegal product on the shelf? I mean, is there kind of legal certainty as to who would eventually kind of face that violation? And does that kind of speak more towards the need of that being a civil penalty? And would a civil penalty solve some of the concerns that, rightfully so, have about chain of custody and things of that nature?
Yeah, so I will say that I absolutely do not have all of the answers here, or maybe any of the answers, and I think that I'm probably one of the least experienced people in this room. So take everything that I say with a grain of salt. But what I'm thinking in terms of legislation and what would go in code and who would ultimately be held responsible or held accountable for these products, I'm thinking about a knowing requirement. So sometimes written in criminal code is whether or not people are aware of what they're doing and of what they're selling. And I think if we want to go a criminal route for some of this, that would be an important piece to include or not to include, but that would just be something to be very intentional about while we're drafting that language. That's all I've got.
Would a civil penalty in this space be more clearly directed to the entity that is selling that product?
So I'm going to look over to my VSP counterparts here, but I think that probably when it comes to businesses and sale of hemp products, that a civil penalty would be more appropriate. And what do you guys think?
So, Mr. Chairman, typically the state police, we don't get involved in any product enforcement at all. Right now, none. So all of our enforcement is, and First Sergeant Gunderson can address this more, all of our enforcement is addressed toward the plant material and marijuana and hemp, because, and Linda, correct me if I'm wrong, there is no measurement for us in law enforcement right now to measure THC, because we cannot use this gentleman's lab. There's no measurement for us to use an outside lab to measure THC in a product, in an edible or in an ingestible. We can only do it in a plant material.
Right. We don't have the method online, although if we would find a way to, if we needed to, we could find a way to do that analysis, most likely through outsourcing. But currently, we do not have that method in available, other than showing that a THC is present, but not a quantitative measurement of how much.
You mentioned a second ago you have a procurement item out. Would that help specifically to this point?
Yes, that's what we're doing, because we have not, in order to develop and validate these methods for all the different matrices of products that are available. It would be fairly time consuming. Our idea is instead, because we haven't been requested to do this on any kind of normal basis, that it would be better resource-wise for the Commonwealth to procure those services externally at a 17025 accredited laboratory.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. I would like to offer comments on behalf of VDAX with respect to a response to the questions that you presented. VDAX has registered industrial hemp growers since the enactment of the industrial hemp law in 2015. In 2018, the law was amended to direct VDAX to register industrial hemp processors so that they too could possess cannabis with no more than 0.3% THC and thereby provide a market for the hemp crop grown in Virginia. Between 2015 and 2018, the hemp industry shifted its focus from producing hemp for its fiber or its grain to producing hemp for its cannabinoids. The industry now produces a range of products containing cannabinoids, including food, beverages, vapes, pre-rolls, cigarettes, and topical personal care products. The diversity of hemp products that now contain cannabinoids presents regulatory challenges, both in identifying the appropriate regulator and in the need for product-specific standards. The manufacture of some hemp products are currently regulated by VDAX, such as manufacturers of food and beverage products that are intended for human consumption, while manufacturers of products that are inhaled or topically applied are not currently regulated by an existing state agency. Additionally, a standard for one type of hemp product containing cannabinoids is not always appropriate as a standard for a different type of cannabinoid-containing products. In fact, even within a product category, the appropriate standards may vary. For example, vapable hemp products may need to be tested for different contaminants than combustible hemp products should be tested for. Multiple state agencies regulating cannabis production and product manufacturing, as we have in the Commonwealth, could also lead to regulatory challenges. While VDAX has a good working relationship with the Board of Pharmacy and the Cannabis Control Authority, we have heard from cannabis regulators in states with multiple cannabis regulatory agencies, including those with hemp, medical cannabis, and adult use cannabis programs, that this structure results in a cumbersome and confusing system for both the regulators and industry. VDAX encourages the task force members to consider the range of hemp products that contain cannabinoids and the expertise needed to appropriately regulate those products as we move forward towards our final report of recommendation.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Mr. Chairman, as far as the obstacles that our agency does face when it comes to enforcing any type of laws, we receive a database spreadsheet right now currently on a monthly basis from VDAX that gives us all the names of the processors, coordinates, and information. However, that information sometimes becomes very stale during our enforcement action. So if we could possibly come up with a solution to have live data or to possibly give us access to the database to where we would be able to know the processors and know the growers, it would be more beneficial.
It's helpful. Thank you. I think we've kind of gone around the horn here. Anybody kind of have any questions or kind of want to chime back in on anything? Any other comments? All right. Well, we can wrap up a little early. Before we do, I do want to mention that amongst talking with some folks, I think we will plan to have a third meeting of the task force. I think preliminary, we were only looking at potentially 2. We are going to plan on having a third meeting with a date to be determined. We will probably look to have that meeting sometime, I would imagine, in either late September, early October timeframe. I would like to try to have a majority of kind of the report kind of compiled and have it ready to kind of be reviewed by the task force. To that point, if you all, members of the task force, could, in consultation with your agency and the other interested stakeholders, if you could kind of compile anything that you want to make sure is included in that report. I would say probably by mid-September, so maybe within the next 4 to 5 weeks, and send that to me. I think that would be very helpful as we kind of go throughout this work. As a reminder, written comment has been extended to remain open through this Friday. I have sent that link around to members of the task force previously. If you need that link again to review, please let me know. I'm happy to get that to you. That's a live link that should be being updated constantly as new comments come in. I do also want to note that the presentations that were made today, the meeting has been live streamed and the video recording will be up, but I'll also make sure that we can post those presentations online. I have Ms. Williams here, and if we can make sure to get the PowerPoint presentation from the Blue Ridge folks, we'll make sure to put that online. But unless there are any other questions, comments, or concerns, seeing none, I think we will adjourn until a date to be determined. Thank you.